Your fiancé did this to me. What the ruthless billionaire did next shocked everyone. Mr. Harrington, your fiancé did this to me. The words came out barely above a whisper, but in the vast marble foyer of Harrington Estate, they landed like a thunderclap. Renee Walker stood at the entrance of Daniel Harrington's private study, her uniform slightly wrinkled, her dark hair pulled back in a loose bun that had clearly been neat hours ago. Her left hand was wrapped in a white bandage, the kind you'd find in a first aid kit when no one bothered to take you to a hospital. Her right hand gripped the doorframe like she might fall if she let go. Daniel Harrington looked up from the stack of acquisition files spread across his mahogany desk. At 38, he was the kind of man who commanded rooms without trying, 6 feet tall, sharp jaw, gray eyes that had seen too many boardrooms and not enough sunsets. His suit cost more than most people's monthly rent. His time was famously worth more than gold. And right now, every single second of that time was focused on the trembling woman standing in his doorway. "Come in," he said, his voice careful. Renee didn't move immediately. Behind her, peeking out from the hallway like a small cautious bird, was Mila, 3 years old. Round brown eyes that were too old for her face, the kind of eyes that had learned early to read rooms and measure danger. She clutched a worn stuffed rabbit by one ear and watched her mother with an expression no 3-year-old should ever have to wear, quiet, watchful worry. Daniel's assistant Marcus had already retreated from the room, sensing that whatever was about to happen was not meant for extra ears. The heavy oak doors were left ajar, and the afternoon light fell through the tall windows in long golden bars across the floor. "Mrs. Walker," Daniel said, softer this time. He rose from his chair, something people rarely saw him do for anyone, and gestured to the sitting area near the window. "Please, sit down." Renee walked in slowly. She turned back once to look at Mila, and something passed between them, that silent language mothers and small children share. "It's okay. Stay there. I'll be right back." Mila nodded, a tiny solemn nod, and sat down cross-legged in the hallway with her rabbit, clearly having done this before, waited outside closed doors for her mother. That single image hit Daniel somewhere he hadn't expected. Renee sat on the edge of the cream armchair like she was afraid of dirtying it. She kept her bandaged hand in her lap. She didn't cry. He would learn, in the minutes that followed, that Renee Walker had trained herself out of crying a long time ago because crying in this house had consequences. "Tell me what happened," Daniel said. She looked at her hands first. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, and seemed to make a decision. "It started 8 months ago," she began. "Right around when you announced the engagement." Daniel said nothing. He had a talent for silence, for creating the kind of quiet that made people feel safe enough to fill it with truth. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and he listened. Renee told him about the first incident, small, easy to dismiss. She had been arranging flowers in the East Parlor, the way she always did on Tuesday mornings, pale roses in the crystal vase that Mrs. Harrington Sr. had loved. Vanessa Cole had walked in, looked at the arrangement, and knocked it off the table. Not accidentally. Deliberately. She'd looked Renee dead in the eye as the vase shattered across the marble floor and said, "Wrong flowers. Wrong everything. You clearly don't belong here." Renee had cleaned it up. She hadn't said a word. Because she needed this job. Because Mila's daycare didn't pay for itself, and the health insurance that came with working for the Harrington household was the only reason Mila had gotten her ear surgery last spring. "I told myself it was just a bad day," Renee said quietly. "Rich people have bad days too." I gave her the benefit of the doubt. But the bad days didn't stop. They escalated. Vanessa began making specific requests designed to humiliate, ordering Renee to re-clean rooms she had already spotlessly cleaned, doing so loudly and in front of other staff members. She began docking Renee's hours, claiming she had arrived late when the entry logs showed otherwise. She started leaving notes, actual handwritten notes, on Renee's cleaning cart. "You missed a spot. Try harder. Maybe this job is beyond your abilities." Daniel's jaw tightened. He said nothing. Then came the incident 3 weeks ago. Vanessa had hosted a luncheon for her charity circle, 12 women in designer clothes drinking sparkling water and deciding which causes were worth their names. Renee had been serving. She'd been careful, precise, the way she always was. But Vanessa had stopped her in the middle of the room, in front of all 12 women, and announced that Renee had stolen a bracelet from her dressing room. The room had gone silent. Renee's voice didn't break when she recounted this part, but her fingers tightened in her lap. She said it right there. 12 people heard it. She said I had gone through her jewelry and taken a diamond tennis bracelet. Renee paused. I had never been in her dressing room. Not once. Her personal rooms were never part of my assignment. I've never stolen anything in my life. Daniel's gray eyes had gone very still. The bracelet turned up 2 days later, Renee continued. In her own handbag. Her personal assistant found it. But there was no announcement. No apology. Not to me, not to the staff. She just moved on. Like it never happened. The bandaged hand. Daniel looked at it. 3 days ago, Renee said, and here her voice did something small and complicated. She asked me to clean the greenhouse. The back greenhouse, the one that isn't regularly maintained. I went in, and the glass panel on the upper shelf had been left propped against the wall. Unsafely. When I reached up to retrieve a planter she'd specifically requested, it came down. She gestured to her hand. I needed 7 stitches. The urgent care said I was lucky it didn't hit my face. She looked up at him. She knew that panel was there, Renee said. Her assistant had flagged it in the household notes 2 days before. She assigned me that task anyway. And when I told Marcus I needed to leave early for the urgent care, she called me personally and told me that if I left before my shift ended, I shouldn't bother coming back. The room was absolutely silent. From the hallway, barely audible, came the small sound of Mila humming softly to her rabbit. Daniel Harrington stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a long moment with his back to Renee, looking out at the manicured grounds, the grounds Renee had indirectly helped keep beautiful for 3 years. When he turned around, his expression had changed into something Renee had never seen on his face before. Not cold, not calculating. Something rawer than that. Who else knows about this? He asked. The staff, she said simply. They all know. They've all seen pieces of it. But no one talks. Because she's about to be Mrs. Harrington, and no one wants to lose their job. He nodded once, slowly. You came to me anyway, he said. Renee met his eyes. My daughter watched me come home with stitches and asked if the bad lady did it. Her voice was steady, but something fierce burned underneath it. I decided I was done pretending for the sake of someone else's comfort. In the hallway, Mila had fallen asleep against the wall, her rabbit tucked under her chin, her small chest rising and falling in the peace that only children can find in the middle of storms. Daniel looked at the sleeping child for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. The kitchen of Harrington Estate ran on 2 things, efficiency and silence. Head chef Raymond Okafor had worked in the estate for 11 years. He had cooked for foreign dignitaries, celebrity guests, and grieving families. He had learned early that a household kitchen was the truest mirror of a home. Everything that the front rooms concealed, the kitchen reflected without apology. Who was kind? Who was cruel? Who remembered to say thank you, and who treated the staff like furniture? When Raymond saw Daniel Harrington walk into the kitchen at 4:30 in the afternoon, something that had not happened in the 3 years since Daniel's mother passed, every person in the room went still. Daniel didn't announce himself. He pulled out a stool at the prep counter, sat down, and said simply, "Tell me about Vanessa." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Raymond had heard in years. The junior staff looked at each other, at the floor, at their hands. The refrigerator hummed. Someone's knife rested against a cutting board and did not move. Raymond wiped his hands on his apron and met Daniel's gaze. "What would you like to know, sir?" "Everything," Daniel said. "That you haven't told me." And so it came out, not all at once, not easily, but the way truth comes out in households like these, in fragments and hesitations, and the slow exhale of people who have been holding their breath for too long. Sofia, the young housekeeper from Guatemala who sent half her paycheck to her mother in Quetzaltenango, spoke first. She talked about the time Vanessa had gone through the staff lockers personally, claiming she was looking for a missing phone, and how afterwards Sofia had found her private letters from home crumpled and left on the floor. She read them, Sofia said. I know she read them. She made a comment later about how sweet it was that I still wrote letters, like it was funny. Like my family was funny. Thomas, the groundskeeper, talked about being accused of tracking mud through the front entrance, mud that the security camera footage clearly showed had been walked in by one of Vanessa's guests. She had me re-landscape the entire East Garden as punishment, he said, his voice carefully neutral. 6 weeks of work, replanted, because she wanted to make a point. The stories accumulated. Not dramatic explosions, though there had been those too, but the steady, grinding accumulation of small cruelties. The kind that left no single bruise you could point to, but wore a person down to their foundations over time. Amara, who managed the household linens and had a smile that usually lit up whatever room she was in, talked about the evening 3 months ago when Vanessa had hosted a dinner and, displeased with how a tablecloth had been pressed, had pulled the entire table setting to the floor. Not in a rage, that was what Amara kept emphasizing. Not in a rage. Calmly. Deliberately. And then looked at Amara and said, "Now you have something to do." I went home that night, Amara said quietly, and I updated my resume. Daniel listened to every word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't minimize. He sat at that prep counter in his $3,000 suit, and he listened the way a man listens when he is genuinely ashamed of something, not defensively, not with explanations ready, but with the full weight of accountability settling across his shoulders. Because the truth that was landing hardest wasn't about Vanessa. It was about himself. He had been in this house. He had walked these halls. He had passed these people in corridors and nodded good morning and considered himself, privately, a decent employer. A fair man. A man who respected the dignity of work and the people who performed it. And all of this had been happening 20 feet from his study. Raymond spoke last. He had waited, watching Daniel's face as each story was told, measuring the man the way he measured everything, carefully, with long experience. "Sir," Raymond said, "the staff doesn't blame you directly. You're not in the house much. You travel. You trust that things are being managed." He paused. But Miss Cole, she made it known very early that she would be the one managing things, and that complaints going up the ladder would be considered disloyal. She threatened people's jobs, Daniel said flatly. Raymond didn't soften it. Yes. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that surprised them all. Is there anyone she hasn't targeted? Raymond almost smiled, but it was a sad smile. Marcus, he said. Your personal assistant. Because he reports directly to you, and she couldn't touch him. Which is why I only ever heard Marcus's version of this household, Daniel said, more to himself than to anyone else. He stood up. He looked around the kitchen, at Sofia and Thomas and Amara, at the 3 junior staff members who hadn't spoken but hadn't left either, who had stood there and listened and let their presence be a kind of testimony. Thank you, he said. All of you. What you've told me tonight took courage. Sofia looked like she might cry. She pressed her lips together and nodded. Daniel pulled out his phone as he walked back toward the hallway. He scrolled to a name. His thumb hovered over it. Then he dialed. The phone rang twice before a bright, confident voice answered. Daniel. I'm just on my way back from the gallery opening. It was absolutely. Vanessa, he said. Come home. We need to talk. A brief pause. Is everything all right? No, he said simply. It isn't. He hung up. In the kitchen behind him, nobody moved for a long moment. Then Raymond exhaled slowly, looked at the ceiling, and said quietly, to no one in particular, well, finally. Amara put her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders shook, not with sadness, but with the complicated, overwhelmed relief of someone who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had just been told they could finally set it down. Vanessa Cole arrived home at 7:15 in a black car, wearing a cream coat, her dark hair swept into the kind of effortless elegance that required 45 minutes and 3 different products to achieve. She was beautiful in the way certain dangerous things are beautiful, completely, compellingly, with an edge underneath that you only noticed when it was too late. She walked through the front entrance with the confidence of a woman who owned the space she occupied, which, technically, she did not yet, but she had been practicing. Daniel was waiting in the front sitting room. Not in his study, where power was his by default. Not in the library, where he was most comfortable. He had chosen the sitting room deliberately, neutral ground, with enough space and enough light to have a conversation that had nowhere to hide. He was standing when she walked in. That, too, was deliberate. Vanessa read rooms the way predators read terrain. She noted his posture, the absence of a drink in his hand, the fact that Marcus was not present, and the particular quality of the silence in the house. Too quiet, the way a house gets when the staff has been told to make themselves scarce. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened. "You sounded strange on the phone," she said, setting her bag on the side table. "What's happened?" "Renee Walker came to see me today," Daniel said. A pause. Vanessa's expression did something subtle, a small recalibration. So quick most people would have missed it. "The maid? What about her?" "She told me about the greenhouse," he said. "About the glass panel. About the 7 stitches." Vanessa tilted her head. "She's exaggerating. It was an accident. I had no idea that panel was." "It was flagged in the household maintenance notes 2 days before you assigned her that task," Daniel said. "I read the notes this afternoon." Silence. "I also spoke to the rest of the staff." He let that land. "All of them." Vanessa's posture changed, a small, precise stiffening, the kind of adjustment that happens when someone is recalculating their strategy in real time. She sat down, crossed her legs, and looked at him with the expression she used in negotiations. Open, reasonable, slightly wounded. "Daniel," she said, "you're taking the word of the help over mine." Something shifted in his face.
"Don't call them that."
"Excuse me? Don't call them the help," he said. "They have names. They have families. They come to work in this house every day, and they do their jobs with more integrity than." He stopped.
Breathed.
"Renee Walker has worked in this house for 3 years. In 3 years, not one complaint, not one incident, not one disciplinary note. She has a 3-year-old daughter. She works this job because the health insurance paid for her child's surgery." Vanessa's expression flickered. "You accuse her of theft," Daniel said. "In front of 12 people. The bracelet was in your handbag." "I made a mistake." "You didn't apologize." "Daniel, you sent her into an unsafe workspace when you knew it was unsafe, and when she needed to leave for medical attention, you threatened her job." His voice was even, controlled. But there was something underneath it that Vanessa, for the first time, couldn't read. "That's not a mistake. That's a pattern." Vanessa stood up. She was good at this, movement as a power tactic, reshuffling the physical space to regain narrative control. "I think you're being extraordinarily dramatic about the behavior of a member of the cleaning staff," she said. "I run this household." "You don't run this household," he said. "This is my home. These are people I am responsible for. And I have failed them by not paying attention." He picked up a folder from the side table, printed pages, he had been thorough, and set it down in front of her. "This is what the last 8 months have looked like from their perspective. I'd like you to read it." Vanessa looked at the folder, and then back at him. Her eyes were calculating now, fully, the warmth stripped back to the infrastructure underneath. "Are you serious?" she said. "Yes. You compiled a file on me, based on staff gossip. Based on documented incidents," he said. "Security footage, maintenance logs, medical records from an urgent care facility." The room was very quiet. "I want to understand something," Vanessa said, and her voice had changed, gone colder, more precise. "You're choosing a maid over your fiancé." "I'm choosing decency," he said, "over a pattern of cruelty that I should have seen sooner." Something crossed Vanessa's face then, not hurt exactly. More like the expression of a person who has encountered an obstacle they genuinely did not anticipate. She had understood Daniel Harrington to be many things: driven, ambitious, occasionally cold. She had not understood him to be this, whatever this was. "I think," Daniel said, "that this engagement needs to be reconsidered." The word reconsidered sat in the air between them. Vanessa looked at him for a long moment. She picked up her bag from the side table. She smoothed her coat. She did all of this with a composure that was, in its own way, impressive. "You'll regret this," she said at the door. "I already regret it," he said. "I regret it took me this long." The front door closed behind her with a quiet, definitive click. Daniel stood alone in the sitting room for a moment. Then he set down the folder, sat in the armchair, and put his head in his hands, not dramatically, not theatrically. The way a man sits when he has done the right thing and it cost him something real, and he is allowing himself 60 seconds to feel the weight of that before he stands back up. 60 seconds. Then he stood up. Renee almost didn't come in the next morning. She stood outside the service entrance of Harrington Estate at 7:45 a.m. with Mila's hand in hers. She hadn't been able to arrange daycare on such short notice, and the estate had a small sitting room near the kitchen that had historically been used as an informal children's space when staff needed it. She had used it twice before, years ago when Mila was still in a portable bassinet, and Renee had been newly hired and newly alone. But standing there now, she felt the particular vulnerability of someone who has told the truth and is now waiting to find out what it costs. She had done the math on the bus ride over. If she was fired, and she might be fired, regardless of what Daniel had said, because the world didn't always reward honesty, and she had learned this lesson more than once, she had 6 weeks of savings. 6 weeks to find another job, another health insurance plan, another situation. Mila's next checkup was in 2 months. The copay alone. "Mama," Mila said, tugging her hand. "We going in?" Renee looked down at her daughter. Mila was wearing her yellow raincoat, even though there was no rain forecast, because she had decided several weeks ago that yellow was her power color, and she wore it preemptively. Her stuffed rabbit, Gerald, full name Gerald Reginald Walker, a name Mila had assigned with great ceremony, was tucked under her arm. "Yeah, baby," Renee said. "We're going in." She opened the service door. The kitchen was already warm, full of the smell of coffee and Raymond's famous breakfast pastries that he made on Wednesday mornings, because he had decided years ago that Wednesday was the hardest day of the week and deserved compensation. Sophia was at the prep station. Thomas had come through 20 minutes early for coffee, which he did sometimes in winter. They all looked up when Renee walked in. What happened next was small, but it wasn't nothing. Sophia put down what she was doing and crossed the kitchen and hugged Renee. Not with words. Just a hug. The kind that says "I know" and "we're here" and "you're not alone" without requiring any of those words to be spoken aloud. Thomas raised his coffee mug in a small, solemn toast. Raymond looked at her over the pastry tray with an expression that managed, simultaneously, to be professional and deeply kind.
"There's coffee," he said.
"And I made the almond ones. I know they're your favorite." Renee blinked. She was not going to cry in the kitchen.
She had made a decision about that.
She was absolutely going to cry in the kitchen. "Mama's crying," Mila announced, with the matter-of-fact observation of a 3-year-old who has decided this information is newsworthy. "I'm not crying," Renee said, wiping her eyes. "Your face is leaking," Mila said helpfully. Raymond laughed, a real laugh, the kind that hadn't echoed through that kitchen in a while. And then Sophia laughed, and Thomas, and even the 2 junior staff members who'd come in early looked up from their phones and smiled at the small child in the yellow raincoat delivering medical updates on her mother's face. Mila looked around at the laughing adults with great satisfaction, as though she had planned this outcome from the beginning. Marcus appeared at the kitchen door at 8:15 with a particular expression he wore when he had information. Mr. Harrington would like to see the full staff in the main hall at 9 o'clock, he said. All available household staff. The kitchen went quiet. All of them? Raymond asked. All available, Marcus confirmed. And then, in a small departure from his usual professional neutrality, he added, I'd recommend being there. At 9 o'clock, the main hall of Harrington Estate held 12 people in household uniforms, 2 part-time ground staff, and 1 3-year-old in a yellow raincoat who had been promised that if she stayed quiet during the grown-up talking, she could have a second pastry. Daniel Harrington walked in at 9 on. He wasn't in a suit. He was in dark trousers and a simple gray shirt, sleeves rolled up, the kind of clothes he wore when he wasn't performing anything for anyone. He stood at the front of the room and looked at the people in front of him, and something in the set of his jaw told Renee, who was standing near the back, that he had been up most of the night. I'll be brief, he said, because what I have to say doesn't require much in the way of speeches. He paused. I have become aware of a serious and sustained pattern of mistreatment directed at members of this household staff over the past 8 months. I am ending my engagement to Vanessa Cole, effective last night. She will not be returning to this property. The silence in the room had a texture to it, stunned, held breath, the kind of silence that happens when something you had hoped for but stopped believing in suddenly becomes real. I owe each of you an apology, he continued. This is my home. You are in my employ. Your safety, your dignity, your right to come to work without fear, that is my responsibility. I failed it. He didn't dress it up. I intend to do better. In the back of the room, Mila had been quiet for 4 whole minutes, which was a personal record. She looked up at her mother, trying to read the room. Renee's expression was the complicated kind, the kind where you're trying to hold too many feelings at once, and your face is doing its best. There will be back pay issued for any hours improperly docked, Daniel continued. Medical expenses for any work-related injuries will be fully covered. And for anyone who feels they cannot remain in this position after what happened, I will provide the strongest possible reference and 3-month severance. He looked around the room. But I hope you'll stay, he said, and for the first time, the formal control in his voice gave way to something simpler and more human. Because this house works because of you. And I have not said that enough. The room was very still. Then Mila, who had lasted an admirable 4.5 minutes, raised her hand. Daniel blinked. Yes. Are you the boss? She asked. I am, he said seriously. She considered this. Do you have a dog? A startled laugh moved through the room. Daniel looked at this small person in her yellow raincoat regarding him with profound, direct seriousness, and something shifted in his expression. Something that had been set very hard and tight for a very long time came slightly, carefully loose. I don't, he said. Should I get one? Mila nodded firmly. Yes. Dogs make houses nicer. I'll take that under advisement, he said. 3 days after the meeting in the main hall, Renee was called to Daniel's study again. She went with the same careful composure she brought to most things, squared shoulders, steady hands, the emotional armor she had been constructing since she was 19 years old and found out she was pregnant and alone, and the person she had counted on had made it very clear he had no intention of counting back. She knocked on the open door. Daniel was at his desk, but he stood when she came in, that same gesture that had startled her the first time and startled her again now because it was such a simple thing, standing up when someone enters a room, and yet so few people in her life had done it. Please sit, he said. I wanted to update you personally. He told her first about the formal complaint that had been filed, legal proceedings related to the workplace injury, which his attorneys were handling. Vanessa would be held accountable through the proper channels. He didn't dramatize it. He was factual and clear. Renee nodded. There's something else, he said. He slid a folder across the desk. Renee looked at it, then back at him. Open it, he said quietly. Inside was a letter. Formal letterhead, the kind with embossed crests. She read the opening lines and then looked up. What is this? The Harrington Foundation manages several initiatives, he said. One of them is an education fund. It supports working parents pursuing degrees or certifications they were unable to complete. He paused. I looked at your personnel file. You were 2 semesters away from your nursing degree when you left school. Renee stared at him.
8 years ago, she said.
The fund will cover completion of your program, he said. Tuition, materials, and a scheduling arrangement that allows you to maintain your hours here while attending evening classes, if that's what you want. If you'd prefer to pursue the degree full-time, your position will be held for you. The room was very quiet. Renee looked down at the folder. She thought about the nursing textbooks she still had in a box in her closet, had never been able to get rid of them. Even when they took up space, she couldn't really afford. She thought about the semester she'd had to withdraw from, the financial aid forms she'd filled out 3 times trying to find a way to stay enrolled. She thought about standing in a hospital hallway with Mila's small hand in hers and watching nurses move through the corridors with that particular purposeful calm and thinking, that was supposed to be me. That was the plan. Why? She asked. Her voice was steady, but the word was very small. Daniel considered the question honestly. Because you walked into my study knowing it might cost you your job and told me the truth anyway, he said. Because your daughter is watching you every single day, and what she sees matters. He paused. And because I've spent a lot of time in the last week looking at the difference between what I thought this house was and what it actually was. I'd like to start building the version that should have existed all along. Renee pressed her lips together. She was not going to cry in the study. She was absolutely going to cry in the study. Your face is leaking again, said a small voice from the hallway. Mila was there, Gerald the rabbit under one arm, peering around the doorframe with enormous eyes. I told you to wait by the bench, Renee said. I waited, Mila said reasonably. And then I stopped. She looked at Daniel. Did you get a dog? Not yet, he said. I'm working on it. Mila appeared to accept this as a satisfactory progress report. She wandered back to the hallway. Renee looked at the folder again. She touched the edge of the letter carefully, the way you touch something you're not sure is real. I'll need to think about it, she said, because she had learned, carefully and at cost, not to accept gifts that came with hidden weight, not to trust windfalls until she understood what they were made of. Of course, Daniel said. There was no pressure in his voice. No performance of generosity, waiting to be praised. Just the simple, clean offer of a door held open. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. The staff, she said. Sophia. Thomas.
Amara.
Raymond. Is it just me or? The fund is available to all household staff, he said. Effective immediately. For education, continuing certifications, or professional development. The announcement goes out tomorrow. Renee sat very still for a moment. Then she closed the folder carefully, stood up, and extended her hand. Daniel shook it, not the way an employer shakes a hand, performatively, but the way 2 people confirm something real.
Thank you, she said. Thank you, he said.
For not being silent. 6 months later, Harrington Estate felt different. It wasn't anything you could point to immediately. The marble was the same. The gardens were the same. The tall windows still let in the same long golden light on clear afternoons. But there is a quality that homes take on when the people inside them are not afraid, and it is as real and as tangible as sunlight, and Harrington Estate had it now. Renee was halfway through her first semester back. Tuesday and Thursday evenings, she drove from the estate to the university campus, 32 minutes each way, a route she knew now by heart, including the street with the good radio signal and the intersection where the light took forever. She sat in classrooms with students 10 years younger than her, and she kept up with every single one of them. Her anatomy professor had pulled her aside after the 3rd exam to ask if she had a medical background. I used to, she had said. I'm reclaiming it. Mila had graduated to a new daycare. one closer to the campus, with a late pickup option, and had strong opinions about it, mostly positive, with one ongoing grievance about the color of the outdoor equipment. It should be yellow, she had explained to Renee and to Raymond and to Daniel on one occasion when she had ended up in the main kitchen waiting for her mother. Yellow is the best color for outside things. Daniel had acquired a dog. This was not something anyone had fully anticipated, least of all Daniel. He had done it, and he would never say this out loud, but everyone in the household knew it, largely because of Mila's very compelling argument that dogs made houses nicer. The dog was a 3-year-old golden retriever named Clifford, named by Mila during the one afternoon she had been present when Daniel was unsuccessfully attempting to decide on a name, and she had offered her services. Clifford had immediately and completely dismantled his professional reputation by flopping across Daniel's feet at every opportunity and making him laugh in the middle of phone calls. The staff had found this deeply satisfying. Raymond's kitchen remained the heart of the house. It always had been, but now it felt like it was allowed to be. There were Friday afternoon gatherings that had developed organically, where whoever wasn't on specific duties would drift into the kitchen, and Raymond would produce something extraordinary from whatever was on hand, and they would eat together at the prep counter in a way that was unprofessional and completely human. Daniel had walked in on this twice. The first time, he had paused in the doorway for a moment, unreadable. Then he had sat down and accepted the bowl of something Raymond put in front of him and stayed for 40 minutes. The second time, he brought Clifford, who ate a piece of bread that Thomas accidentally dropped and was thereafter considered a full member of the kitchen gathering by popular consensus. Sophia had started an online program in business management. Thomas had signed up for a landscape architecture certification. Amara was taking a textile design course on weekends, something she had quietly loved for 20 years and never had the means to pursue. She had shown Renee her first project, a small piece she'd made on her own time, the colors precise and vibrant, and Renee had said, "Amara, this is extraordinary," and Amara had looked at the piece for a moment with the expression of someone seeing something true about themselves reflected back for the first time. The legal matter with Vanessa had concluded. The details were private, but the outcome was just, and the people who needed to know knew. What mattered was the closing of that chapter, clean, definitive, without drama. Daniel had changed too, in the way that people change when they have reckoned with something real about themselves and not looked away from it. He was in the house more. Not dramatically, he was still who he was, still had a company to run and a schedule that would have flattened most people, but more present. More likely to know people's names when he saw them. More likely to pause in the hallway for an actual conversation rather than a nod. He had asked Renee once, in the kitchen on a Friday afternoon while Clifford terrorized Thomas's shoelace and Mila gave Raymond detailed instructions on the correct way to frost a small cookie she had been given authority over, how she was managing the balance of it all. Honestly, she had said, "Yes. Some days I'm exhausted and I question everything," she had said. "And then I get to class and I understand something I've been waiting 8 years to understand, and I drive home and Mila is asleep and I think, this is the life I was trying to get to. I just took a detour." He had nodded, slowly. "A long detour," she had added. "Some of the most important ones are," he had said. "It wasn't a romance. That was not the shape of this story. That is not what Renee needed, and Daniel was a man learning, slowly, how to be present in his own life before he could be present in someone else's. What it was something quieter and in some ways more durable, a restored faith, on both sides, in the idea that people can see each other clearly and act accordingly. That it is possible to be witnessed and to not be diminished by it. That the right thing, done late, is still the right thing. On the last evening of Renee's first semester, she came back to the estate at 9:30 at night and found a small, hand-drawn card on the kitchen counter addressed to her in the unmistakable handwriting of a 3-year-old, loops and determination, and a yellow sun in the corner that took up most of the available space. "Mama, you did the thing. Love, Mila and Gerald." And below that, in Raymond's neat cursive, "We're proud of you." And below that, in Sophia's loopy script, and Thomas's block letters, and Amara's elegant hand, and 3 other signatures from the junior staff who had apparently been recruited into this project. And at the very bottom, in simple, unadorned print, "Well done.
DH."
Renee stood in the empty kitchen at 9:30 at night and held that card, and she let herself feel, fully, without armor, without calculation, what it meant to be in a place where the people around you were paying attention, where your hard work was seen, where your daughter could fall asleep in a hallway with her rabbit and wake up in a house that was safe. She put the card carefully in her bag. She would put it, later that night, in the box in her closet, the same box that held the nursing textbooks she had never been able to throw away, the box of things she was still reaching for. It fit perfectly. Upstairs, in a house that had learned, imperfectly and late but genuinely, how to be what it should have always been, Clifford the dog was asleep on Daniel Harrington's feet. And the lights were on.
And it was warm.
And